Well, see, definitely we're trying to find that balance here when it comes to, clean energy. Most of the time you expect, cleaner energy and maybe affordable energy could help, balance out what's playing out so far in the global energy market with oil prices, hitting highs we've not seen in a long time. But how's that going so far in Nigeria? Let's talk to Rukia Oduni. She's a Chief Operating Officer at Bundle Go. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be here.
Fantastic. So, definitely when we see energy prices rising like this and, it gets to the pump, the same thing, you have to pay more to buy fuel, and most of the time that translates to higher transport costs. And there's been so much talk about CNG buses, the use of CNG in Nigeria for vehicles. There's also that EV market. I think this is the best time, for the EV markets to shine, with prices so high. But help us understand what's playing out so far with clean energy and, rising energy prices.
Okay, thank you for that. Petrol price is volatile at the moment, and this cascades directly into the economy. It affects the whole economy. It's worthy to note that transportation is the backbone of commerce, and this, in turn, it impacts the economy in two ways. First of all, like you just mentioned, the cost of transportation is relatively high. And in that note, it indirectly affects every other thing because transportation is the underpin of the movement of goods and services in Nigeria. So when that cost is already high, the cost of daily activities, cost of production, cost of movement, cost of everything spikes up. And then this erodes the purchasing power of every average Nigerian. And there's only so much that the CBN's monetary policy can absorb. We're not just talking about hiking power, we're also talking about economic sustainability over time. And then you also mentioned something about the CNG. The government adopted this a while back, and it's very laudable. It's the right conversation to be having, actually. But then when you think about it, it's a government-anchored initiative. And there's only so much the government can absorb, like I just mentioned earlier. Because you're talking about funding cycles, you're talking about policy shifts, and there's limited private sector engagement here. So if there are policies or structures or incentives put in place for banks or private sectors to be able to key into this, you see that this adoption will gain ground, because if you check it now, the momentum is quite low. That's where Bundle Go comes in, where we use sustainable electricity, sustainable mean mobility solutions. We're partnering with private entities in the private sector to create this infrastructure over time. There's this misconception that when you use an electric vehicle, you're consuming a lot of power. But yes, initially it is capital intensive, but on the long run, you realize that it is cheaper to maintain. There's really very low to zero to low maintenance cost as well. Just like the CNG to the conversion, the cost is really high. That's why an average Nigerian cannot access it. And also, if you think about what Bundle Goal is aiming to achieve with partnering with private sectors, we're creating this infrastructure to be accessible to an average Nigerian across cities. We're not only consuming power, we're also making sure that we're bringing back enough energy back into the system for people to benefit from.
But I think I've noticed, driving around, you see maybe a keke there, you see it powered by, electricity or something. So we're seeing some adoption, somehow when it comes to, electricity. But what do you think, because even globally, the adoption is not as fast as, one would expect. What would you think is that move that most of the governments can take right now to actually say, you know what, let's roll out, cleaner, affordable energy that can actually, even though, it's expensive, if you're trying to even, go off grid, you need a huge sum, to buy maybe solar panels and all of that if you want to escape band A and, buy fuel, for your generator. So there's an affordability issue even when it's clean and, the dirtier option, at this point. What do you think is the way forward?
Okay, there's a wise saying that I got from a very wise man. It says that we're too poor to afford cheap things. Because if you think about it, if you're thinking about the first cost of going into the business, you think, oh, it's too much. But if you think about what you're spending across over time, you realize that the cost of maintenance is low. The cost that you're accumulating over time becomes relatively low. So imagine that I have to charge at a zero carbon emission. You're moving up and down. You're not spending like carbon. You're also addressing climate change. Your government is partnering with private sectors, hence the policies and the incentives that I mentioned earlier. Imagine the government is funding this or is backing this up. It makes it easier. Like you said, you mentioned keke, for instance. An average keke person can easily access these infrastructures if governments come to pay, if they create this incentive for people. So it's very easy to adopt. I realize that the cost will become relatively smaller. And electricity is something that we're using. We're currently using electricity here at the moment. Imagine that you're going off-grid and you're generating your own electricity. Renewables.
Instead of buying diesel. At about 1.6 or so per liter.
Exactly. And this is also worthy to note that we are not eradicating the use of crude oil. Crude oil is very essential because we can't do without crude oil for the next, what, 50 years or so, or 30 years? If you think about it very well, we can't do without crude oil as a matter of fact at all, because you only think, when people say crude oil, they think about just petrol and diesel. But it has its own byproducts, petroleum jellies, lubricants that you use for machineries, that you use to power most of our technology now. It also have effects on the advancements of technology. So you can't just totally eradicate crude oil. We're supposed to have a good mix of it. So we're not totally dependent on just the crude oil. And because we're totally dependent on crude oil, that's hence this volatility, hence what is going on right now. So imagine you have a good mix of this. That's where Bondugo is pushing to say, you know what? We can have a mix of this. One can complement the other. If you adopt this, it's sustainable, it's renewable, it's coming from up, it's easy maintenance. Don't you think so?
Oh, yeah. Going by what I've seen so far play out with electricity, band A, and, imagine having to deal with band A and buying fuel at 1.2 to power your gen, when the light is not there. It's a huge cost. So, looking at the body language of this present administration and what's happening in the private sector, what are you seeing going forward for adoption?
The adoption, I would say that if, like I just mentioned, if government can make its policies and incentives for investment banks, for private sectors, to be able to bring it to an average Nigerian, it should be easier to adopt. If we do partnerships, that's where Bondugo comes in, because we identify the pain points. We realize that there's this niche of corporate individuals and professionals that they have a particular need that is not being catered to. There's this challenge of commuting daily that is costing a whole lot. If you can address these issues, we see we have more productivity, we have more adoption. But imagine that we're here now and you're doing renewable and sustainable energy. You realize that you're able to focus on your core. You're able to take it down to the average keke nape person. There's incentives, there's policies. People are more open. It's not only limited to government. That's like I said, there's shifting policies, there's funding cycles. So if you open it up to more individuals, a lot of people are open to partnering. Even Bondugo, we're very open to partnering with the government for adoption. We're partnering with private entities. Like I just mentioned, we're not only consuming, we're also giving back to the economy. We're making sure that energy is being given back to as well.
All right. Yep, definitely energy is the focus right now with oil prices. I remember 2025, I was wondering, what could actually be that catalyst to take oil prices higher. It was ranging, for most of last year, but I guess it takes a war at this point. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you. Rukia Wodunis is the Chief Operating Officer at Bondugo. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
Right, we'll take a moment now. When we come back, we check out what's playing out in the global economy.